What we're watching here is the controlled demolition of the American economy, of American manufacturing, of American industry, of American productive capacities, and really the broader Western world, what used to be known as the free world and Christendom before that, and the transferring of that productive capability, productive capacity to communist China, to Russia, to Brazil, to South Africa, to the BRICS, and to other hostile third world dictatorships.
This is Kaiser Johnson with Liberty and Finance, and these are the Miles Franklin Weekly Specials for November 10th through November 17th, 2025, while supplies last. First this week, 2025 1-ounce silver Canadian maples are just $6.75 over spot. Next, our choice 1-ounce palladium bars are only $199 over spot. Finally, pre-1933 BU $20 St. Gaudens coins are only $99 over melt per coin. To order our specials or any of the many other options we have available, call us at 1-888-81-LIBERTY. That's 1-888-815-4237. We're available after hours and on weekends, and we look forward to speaking with you.
Welcome back to Liberty and Finance. Our viewers request that we have this guest on more often, and we're trying to. Alex Newman is a contributor at the Epoch Times. He's also founder and editor of The New American. He joins us today, Wednesday, November 12, 2025. Alex, thanks for coming back on Liberty and Finance.
Great to be here. Thank you very much for having me, Dunagun.
On the heels of all of the research you've been doing leading up to the upcoming UN conference that you're about to head across the ocean to go be part of, as you have so many times, we wanted to get your input on what are the things that are key on your radar of things that you're watching out for on the behalf of ordinary people, God-fearing people, our beloved countries, both here and abroad, that are all subject to being trampled by the United Nations. One example that I wanted to make sure that you'll touch on, and I'm sure you will, is this notion of climate hysteria, where after we've been told, okay, first we were told this and we were going into a deep freeze. Then we were told, no, it's going to be global warming. Then we were told, okay, it's climate change and it's going to be existential threat to humanity. Now, even the high priest of that movement, Bill Gates, has said in the last week or two, okay, maybe it's not going to be an existential threat to humanity, but it is still a big deal. There seems to be backpedaling going on right and left from the crowd of so-called consensus about settled science about this. And yet, there's the UN doubling down and saying, but we're going to enforce even over the objections of certain countries. We have to do this on a global manner. So talk to us about what keeps rearing its head as, is it really about the climate or is it about global control? Tell us what you're watching.
Well, thank you, Dunagun. It's great to be here. Really appreciate it. And yes, just tomorrow, when we're recording this, I'll be going down to Brazil for the UN Climate Summit, the COP30. I try to go every year. I've been going for about 15 years now. And it is a major threat to individual liberty, to national sovereignty, to economic prosperity. It is a wealth redistribution scheme as they shut down industry and power generation and energy exploration in the West, move it all to communist China, Russia, other places. And what's interesting about this year, we're seeing some of the dynamics that we saw during Trump's first administration, but on a whole nother level. So this time he is taking the threat much more seriously, and he's doing much more damage to the architecture of the climate machine. On his first day in office, he signed an executive order getting us out of not just the Paris Accord, which he did during his first term, but every single one of the UN agreements that were negotiated under the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, the UNFCCC. This is the foundational underlying treaty upon which all these other agreements are built. And I'm told by well-informed sources that he is seriously considering getting us out of that as well, which would absolutely destroy the foundation that this whole climate shenanigans is built on top of. So that's very huge. And on the domestic front, he is really taking a chainsaw to this. He is undoing a lot of the regulations that Barack Obama and Joe Biden brought in under the guise of climate policy, even to the point of having the EPA go back and rescind what is called the endangerment finding. This is the EPA finding that carbon dioxide is actually pollution and therefore must be regulated by the federal government under the Clean Air Act, which it was obviously a fraud from the very beginning. So Trump is taking this very, very seriously, and that has the climate alarmists very, very concerned. And you mentioned Bill Gates of hell, I call him. He has come out and made an incredibly explosive statement. And I think he has ulterior motives. I'll get to that in just a moment. But he has said that climate change is actually not the primary threat to people around the world. And you're right. He does say that it's still a big deal. We still should be concerned about it. But he says we ought to prioritize things that help people, things like, quote unquote, vaccines and food and things like this. So I don't trust his motives. I suspect what is really going on here is that his investments in Microsoft and some of these other big tech companies require these massive data centers, which require enormous amounts of power. And they all know, just as well as you and I know, Dunagun, that they're not going to power an industrial civilization, much less all these data centers on windmills and solar panels and unicorn flatulence. I mean, it's self-evidently ludicrous. So I think right now they've looked at this and they've said, it's more important that we have this AI data center system so that we can oppress everybody than destroying everything with the climate hoax. For now, we'll get back to that later. Now, what's happening in Brazil is interesting because they've got all of these headwinds in terms of Trump, in terms of Javier Milei in Argentina, in terms of even Bill Gates now throwing some cool water on this. But at the same time, the climate totalitarians, the communists and others who are expecting major advances in their power and in their bank accounts are doubling down. Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, the Marxist president of Brazil, and yes, I said he's a Marxist. He is a Marxist. He actually brags that he's a Marxist. In 1990, he created the Foro de Sao Paulo with Fidel Castro, the narco-Marxist terrorists in Colombia, the FARC, and the Sandinistas in Nicaragua, to take over Latin America for communism and eventually bring down the United States. He has proposed, now very seriously, he's the head of this climate meeting, that the UN go ahead and create a global environmental council that would have the power to enforce the UN's climate decrees on nations. So they are doubling down in a major way here. This is an incredible power grab. And what's happening in Brazil right now is probably the most important thing happening in the world, and yet you're not going to hear much about it from the fake media in America because they've done the polling. They know that Americans don't believe them anymore.
Yeah, could you expand on what the threat is of what you're describing that's coming that we aren't getting told about?
So this proposal by Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva would create what he described as a global environmental council. And as he explained in his own speech about this, it's very frustrating that the UN takes all these decisions on climate, reduce CO2, shut down your power grid, destroy farms, whatever, and governments aren't necessarily obeying. And he actually expresses his frustration. He says, what's the point of having these meetings? What's the point of making all these decisions if countries are just going to ignore them and not obey? We need, he says, a new mechanism that will enforce these decisions, that will monitor government's progress in enforcing these decisions, and then we'll actually make sure that they're being followed. And there was a major development on this, Dunagun, this year that very few people in the United States even noticed, and that was a decision by the International Court of Justice. I call it the International Kangaroo Court of Injustice. It's really a joke of a body, and yet the UN regards it as the Supreme Court of the world. In the Pact for the Future, just last year, every government in the world, including the U.S. government under the leadership of Joe Biden, agreed to recommit itself to submit to the decisions of the International Court of Justice. Well, earlier this year, they issued what many analysts, including UN leaders, are describing as the most important decision in the history of humanity. They ruled that to comply with international law and international human rights agreements, all governments have an obligation to combat the climate crisis by reducing vigorously carbon dioxide emissions, which, by the way, we emit carbon dioxide when we breathe, about 2 pounds of it every day. And they actually said, specifically in their opinion, that failure to do so by government leaders constitutes what they described as an intentionally wrongful act. In other words, they are violating people's human rights if they don't go to war with CO2 emissions. So they're actually laying the groundwork right now for criminal prosecutions of people in government who won't go along with this fraud. And I think a lot of people are tempted to laugh at that. Oh, the UN and their armies are going to come, capture our leaders. Folks, don't laugh just yet, right? Right now, they're going after Benjamin Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of Israel, who, by the way, the state of Israel has never ratified the Rome Statute, which created the International Criminal Court. And yet the UN's court is claiming universal jurisdiction to the point where they now have charges filed and a warrant filed against a sitting head of state. Rodrigo Duterte, who was the president of the Philippines, the only time I ever wrote an article about him was when he came across my desk for saying that the UN was a joke, ought to be disbanded, and that Philippines should leave the UN. I thought that was cute, so I wrote an article about it in the New American. Well, right now, he's sitting in a jail cell in The Hague awaiting trial at the International Criminal Court. There's a new office set up in The Hague. I'm told by sources high up in the United Nations that the primary job of this office, set up under the auspices of the UN Development Program, is to figure out how they can eventually bring criminal charges against Donald Trump himself. So that's not going to happen while he's in the White House. In fact, right now, Trump has placed sanctions on the International Kangaroo Court. But if we get another Joe Biden or another Barack Obama in office, that is going to change very rapidly.
You mentioned along the way not only the pivot by those mouthpieces of claiming hysteria about existential threats to humanity from global climate change, and suddenly realizing, oh, wait, I guess we do need AI data centers if we're going to control everything and everyone, every part of human activity. And we know those drink a lot of electricity. Not only that, but also takes a lot of mined minerals such as copper, silver, and all these things that have been, by the previous administrations who were said they were only eco-friendly, were looking askance, denying and delaying and slow rolling any applications for mining, so that we're decades behind, according to the industry experts that we interview on our channel, at keeping up with the likely demand for copper and silver and other critical materials that are necessary for the type of modern life that a lot of countries are planning. They also turn a blind eye, as you've told us in the past, to the rampant expansion of coal-fired power plants in China and others. Can you talk to us about this just obvious disparity, about the emperor having no clothes on to anybody who will just open their eyes, that at the same time that they're saying you have to curtail all of your life activities in order to prevent consuming petroleum or generating CO2, on the other hand, or doing any mining, on the other hand, oh gosh, we really want all these things that come from it. And if China does it, it's fine.
Yeah. What happened in Paris for me was the absolute proof, the smoking gun evidence that the leaders of this fraud know full well that it's a fraud. I consider this to be literally smoking gun evidence. And so I'll explain my rationale here. I did a big piece on this a few years ago. In 2015, I was actually there at the UN Climate Summit in Paris. The Western governments came and said they were going to slash the CO2 emissions of their populations by incredible amounts. Barack Obama pledged something like 30% reduction in CO2 levels over a 10-year period. He admitted when he was running for office that this was going to have the effect of causing electricity prices to skyrocket. He was being honest. Yes, it caused electricity prices to skyrocket. I'm sure your viewers in the United States are dealing with this right now, right? Your prices have been skyrocketing for years, and that's because they're shutting down power generation. They're not allowing new plants to be built. In Germany, they're literally demolishing their power plants. And so what this does is it causes, just like Barack Obama said, a skyrocketing price in electricity. Well, let's say you own a factory that manufactures something, cars, airplanes, whatever, trains, engines, mining machinery, equipment, tractors, whatever, and you consume $1 million worth of electricity per month to operate your factory. Well, let's say now that the price of electricity to operate your factory doubles to $2 million a year. There goes your whole profit margin right there. But you have the option of relocating that factory to communist China, where electricity is going to cost you 10%, 20% of what it does in the United States of America. Your labor costs will be lower. You'll be able to do business with much more ease. The only response for a sensible businessman is to shut down the factory in the United States and move it over to communist China, which is exactly what's happening. So going back to Paris, the communist Chinese dictatorship showed up and they promised they were going to continue increasing their CO2 emissions for at least the next 15 years. Right now, they're building about 2 coal-fired power plants per week. Their CO2 emissions are 300% or more than the CO2 emissions of the United States already, continuing to rise as U.S. emissions continue to decline. Communist China emits way more CO2 than the entire Western world combined, and yet at this Paris Climate Summit, all these world leaders are giving each other high fives and slapping each other on the back. Oh, we're saving the world. Now, just think about this for a moment. If they truly believed that carbon dioxide was bad for the planet, if they truly believed that carbon dioxide was going to hurt the climate somehow, the worst possible thing that they could do is shut down American industry, American manufacturing, and ship it all to China, where every unit of economic production results in massively more CO2 in the atmosphere than that same unit of economic production would have resulted in the United States. And yet they're celebrating. Why? Because as Klaus Schwab says, founder of the World Economic Forum, Communist China is a role model for many countries. As David Rockefeller said in 1973 in the pages of the New York Slimes in an op-ed. The title was From a China Traveler. He said, what happened in Communist China under the leadership of Chairman Mao is one of the most important and successful social experiments in the history of humanity. You can go back to what George Soros said about 13 years ago in an interview with the Financial Times. Communist China, he said, needs to own the new world order in the same way that the United States owned the previous one. What we're watching here is the controlled demolition of the American economy, of American manufacturing, of American industry, of American productive capacities, and really the broader Western world, what used to be known as the free world and Christendom before that, and the transferring of that productive capability, productive capacity to Communist China, to Russia, to Brazil, to South Africa, to the BRICS, and to other hostile third world dictatorships. So it's a very, very dangerous trend. And that's really all you don't need to study, climatology and read all the peer-reviewed papers to understand this is a fraud and the ringleaders know it. All you have to do is know what I just explained.
Another area of egregious intrusion on people's ability to take care of themselves and to have freedom is our food supply. We've talked about that with you in the past, and you brought us up to date. A lot of this is hidden in these global agendas and these global supremacies over preempting individual countries' rights to self-govern. Culling of livestock herds they're claimed being carriers of the avian flu, nationalizing farmland and converting it into non-productive land. We just saw in the recent government shutdown a shocking revelation of how dependent the people of our good country have become on food from the government as their primary source of providing food for people when the SNAP program and other government benefits were cut off for a period of weeks. Talk to us, if you would, about the real and present danger to our future food supply, all in the name either of climate management, in this case, such as nationalizing farmland, that kind of thing, or of supposedly disease containment, which were cooked up in these very laboratories, many of them in China, we're told we're being protected from by destroying our herds and flocks so that we would no longer be able to feed ourselves.
Yeah, there is and there has been for years now, even longer, a war on farmers, a war on agricultural producers, ranchers, especially small, medium family farms, family ranches, for the purpose of centralizing control over the food supply. It is happening worldwide. It's happening in South Africa as the government pursues expropriation without compensation, or in many cases just has its minions murder the farmers. It's happening in Brazil right now. It's been happening in Brazil for over a decade that I've been exposing it in the New American and other publications. Where they're literally wiping entire agricultural communities off the map under the guise of giving some land back to Indians who supposedly might have walked there one time. I actually called the chief of the Indian tribe that was supposed to get hundreds of thousands of hectares. He said, that's not for us. We're Indians of the floresta, the jungle, not the cerrado, the grasslands. And so this is not for us. Take my word for it. That's what he said. And we're seeing it in the United States. We're seeing it in Canada. We're seeing it in Holland. We've seen it in Sri Lanka. There is an effort to destroy the food production system and to rebuild it in a centralized, fascistic manner. In China, they don't even need an excuse. They just say, get off the land. Estimates say almost 1 million farming villages, not villagers, villages have been wiped off the map in Communist China over the last few decades as they urbanize, as they force all these peasants to go into the big cities. They build them these tiny little boxes masquerading as apartments. So we're watching now a global effort to take complete control over the food supply. And I think the key to understanding it is to go back and reading Henry Kissinger's National Security Memo 200 back in the 1970s, where he talked about using food as a weapon to coerce third world governments, third world countries into reducing their population, into pursuing family planning strategies that would result in less people being born. They understand that control of the food supply results in control of the people. And of course, we see that the threat of no food is a very real weapon in their hands. We saw it here recently with the threat of the government shutdown, that the SNAP benefits, the EBT cards weren't going to be reloaded. And, if you spend any time on social media, you saw endless videos of people saying, well, we're going to go loot, we're going to go riot, we're going to go destroy your cities, we're going to go rob the grocery stores. And we feel entitled to do that. So you've got this convergence of factors, this deliberately created helplessness and dependency, this deliberately created attitude that society owes you free food, and if they don't give it to you, you have the right to burn down cities and so on, that you don't need to take care of yourself. And then the deliberate destruction of our food supply and our money system. So they're leading us very rapidly into what the World Economic Forum calls a poly-crisis, and I do believe that food is going to be a big part of that. We're watching the systematic destruction of traditional agriculture that feeds the world, and it's going to result in some major, major problems ahead.
Alex, in the face of this manufactured poly-crisis that the elite seem to be, I would say, hell-bent on forcing our way and not avoiding. And we even see this at the domestic level where the Congress just went into a stalemate, just a lot of blaming across the aisle, back and forth, and not being productive and effective for the good of the people, and not even addressing the real root causes of the financial poverty that we've been forced into through destruction of our money supply into devalued currency and destroying people's savings and earnings. What do you recommend that ordinary people must do to take care of their individual families and their communities and their states and our beloved country's futures going forward in the face of this destructive direction that's being forced on from on high?
Great question, Dunagun, and I would say it needs to be a multifaceted response. It begins with ourselves. We've got to get ourselves healthy. We've got to acquire important knowledge, and I would recommend that people take this threat very seriously. If you're relying on Walmart or the big box stores for your daily needs, you might want to consider diversifying. You might want to consider meeting some local farmers, going to local farmers markets, supporting your local food producers directly. Depending on where you live, you can probably buy eggs and chicken and meat and cheese and butter and all of these things directly from local farmers. That's what we do, and I encourage other people to explore that. We're also in the process of moving out to our farm. Within the next couple of months here, we should be out on our land. We've already got some cows living there. We're going to have some chickens. It's going to be good fun. And, I think there's a lot of benefits to that. When it comes to the education of your children, I think parents need to immediately retake charge there. They're literally turning your children into weapons against you and your culture and your society and your country and your church and your values.
And against themselves. We just had the founder of the Privacy Academy on talking about targeted AI-generated communications that come to and pull down into a silo of separate individual discouragement and despair and disheartenment, depression, and so on, and hostility and re-education of young people, whether it's on TikTok or elsewhere, whether it's Chinese government sponsored or not. Basically just dragging down the youth, the next generation, leading them to despair and animosity towards their parents and their country.
Absolutely, yeah, and that's what the government school system is doing as well. That's what the so-called entertainment is doing as well. So I would urge parents, if you can, homeschool, find a good Christian school. My wife and I, we use Classical Conversations. We just absolutely love it for our children. It's just been a real blessing. 135,000 students across the country and around the world. There's lots of other great options as well. I'm on the board of the Freedom Project Academy for people who want either K through 12 online Christian school or even just kind of a la carte options to teach various subjects. There's a ton of different options that people can rely on to really retake control of the education of their children. And then when it comes to finances, I would really urge people strongly to consider trying to diversify their sources of income. If you're entirely dependent on a paycheck from a Fortune 500 company or from a government, know that you're in a very vulnerable situation. Take the shot, or booster number 28, or we're going to cut you off. We're going to destroy your life. Try to find alternative income streams if you can. I would definitely encourage people to look at whatever savings they've got. Figure out whether they're where you think they need to be. My wife and I personally, we've invested for a fairly long time in gold and silver, which have retained their value historically over thousands of years as opposed to these fiat currencies. So I would encourage people also to be in prayer, get connected with a local community. If you're not in a local church, a local homeschool co-op, a local network of neighbors who can support each other when times get tough, you really want to consider doing that as quickly as possible.
Alex, for people who want to follow your work on a more frequent basis than your generous visits here with us, how should they get into your Substack or your other publications that you do?
Thank you, Dunagun. So easiest way to sign up for our newsletter, our Substack, is just go to libertysentinel.org, libertysentinel.org. Sentinel is SENTINEL.org. You can also follow us at The New American. I encourage people to get the free daily headlines, even if they're not subscribed to the print magazine, which they should be. And then you can find me on X, Alex Newman Newman_JOU. And if you're interested in classical conversations, just classicalconversations.org. Lots of resources there, and I would encourage people to take advantage of almost everything is free. So.
We've been speaking with Alex Newman, contributor at the Epoch Times, founder of the Liberty Sentinel, and just so grateful, Alex, as always, for your presence with us here on Liberty and Finance.
Thank you for having me, Dunagun. Really appreciate it.
This is Kaiser Johnson with Liberty and Finance, and these are the Miles Franklin Weekly Specials for November 10th through November 17th, 2025, while supplies last. First this week, 2025 1-ounce silver Canadian maples are just $6.75 over spot. Next, our choice 1-ounce palladium bars are only $199 over spot. Finally, pre-1933 BU $20 St. Gaudens coins are only $99 over melt per coin. To order our specials or any of the many other options we have available, call us at 1-888-81-LIBERTY. That's 1-888-815-4237. We're available after hours and on weekends, and we look forward to speaking with you.